From the headquarters of Telesur English in Quito, Ecuador, I'm Carla Gonzalez, and this is From the South. Life is slowly returning to normal in the capital of Zimbabwe following 3 days of fuel protests. Zimbabweans have started to return to the streets in Harare after the violent demonstrations against a government decision to raise the price of gasoline. Scores of civilians, including prominent activists, have been detained after the protests and are expected to appear in court on Thursday to face charges of causing public violence.
Things are beginning to normalize now, so going to work is the only option, otherwise our families will suffer more.
I think things are becoming to be normal as of now, because people are starting to trickle in the city. I think it's starting to normalize.
Zimbabwean activists held a protest in Pretoria, South Africa on Wednesday, calling on the president of Zimbabwe, Emerson Mnangagwa, to restore internet. The internet shutdown takes place amid protests over price hikes on basic food and fuel. Reports coming out of Zimbabwe say that the government has been clamping down on demonstrations. The Pretoria protesters are also calling for President Mnangagwa to step down. The country has struggled economically since former President Robert Mugabe's departure.
About 20 people have died. Now as we speak, the reason they've made this shutdown is so that they can do their works in the night, in darkness, where nobody is seeing. You will remember very well that on August 1, just after the election, they had the courage to shoot people in front of the international media. What's more when there is no media? I'm being told right now that each and every person who tries to take photos or who tries to photograph, even SABC journalists, their cameras are being taken away.
And in Johannesburg, discussions began for an inquiry into the death of a former Rwandan intelligence chief murdered in South Africa. Vincent Karegeya was found dead in December 2013 in a hotel suite in Johannesburg. The local court is discussing whether an investigation should proceed. The Karegeya family's legal team argues that there is overwhelming evidence that the murder was politically motivated.
Something happened and we decided. It would help them to, even the country, Rwanda would know that they have no right to come and kill the people in the country that is not theirs. It should be a lesson even for Rwandese to stand up for themselves and say this is not the right thing to be done, and there should be sanctions on that country.
We now look at Latin America. Hundreds of members of the migrant caravan spent the night sleeping on the streets of the Guatemalan capital. Despite the freezing cold, Honduran citizens, with children among them, tried to get some rest before continuing their journey towards the Mexican border, with attempts of seeking asylum in the United States. Honduran migrants say that their journey was motivated by the precarious social conditions in the country, as well as the escalating violence. Guatemala's National Immigration Institute has reported that there are 325 children among this latest group, with approximately 100 people from El Salvador joining them as well.
The stories of Hondurans fleeing their country are all very similar. They say they do not have any options here, so they leave to protect their lives.
On April 9th of 2016, I was shot. The bullet went right through me. I sought justice, but authorities never solved my case.
Young people make up the majority of this second caravan. Their hopelessness and fear for the future has forced them to look for new opportunities.
There have been so many deaths. It's difficult not to be affected by them, so I want to be far away.
Many migrants have been victims of violence. Now they have to leave their families.
My mother is sick, and now she's going to be alone. She got shot the same day when I was attacked.
Daily violence has created panic and fear among the population, especially in those who live in the most dangerous areas.
There was a massacre where I was working. They told me they were going to kill me too. That is why I'm fleeing. There's a lot of violence and crime, and we're starving too.
A large percentage of people in the first and second migrant caravans are young people. So the future of Hondurans is fleeing from the country in order to save their own lives.
Venezuela's Foreign Minister Jorge Arreaza met with the UN Secretary General Antonio Guterres on Wednesday. Arreaza has ratified the commitment made by the Bolivarian Revolution with the UN 2030 Sustainable Development Goals. He also said multilateralism is needed to guarantee peace, and that Venezuela continues to suffer interference attempts.
There's an extremist supremacist government headed by Donald Trump that has launched a series of attacks against the Venezuelan people. Venezuela is under an economic blockade similar to the one Cuba has been suffering for 60 years. The world banking system is afraid to work with Venezuela because of these sanctions. We have taken the 17 UN Sustainable Development Goals as the core in our policies for the next 6 years. We have been doing it since 2015. President Nicolás Maduro is committed to develop our national policies in the same line promoted by the United Nations for a better country, a better region, and a better society.
Let's hear from our correspondent, Karina Cartagena, who has more details about this meeting.
Venezuela's Foreign Minister Jorge Arreaza has held a bilateral meeting with the UN Secretary General Antonio Guterres. Talking to the press at the UN headquarters, Arreaza said they mainly talked about two relevant topics. The first one was the fulfilling of the UN 2030 Sustainable Development Goals. The other one was the situation in Venezuela, especially related to the constant attempts made by the U.S. to intervene in the domestic affairs of the Latin American country. Arreaza said that the UN Secretary General expressed he is aware of the situation in Venezuela and that he defends that it should be solved promoting dialogue among the Venezuelan people and their institution. The UN Secretary General has also rejected the intervention of foreign countries in Venezuela's domestic affairs.
That was Karina Cartagena from the U.S. And while in New York, Arreaza met with representatives of U.S. social movements. The foreign minister, alongside representative of the UN, Samuel Moncada, met with a group from the People's Forum, who expressed their solidarity with the fight for the sovereignty of Venezuela. They condemned the increasing attacks against the Bolivarian Revolution by the U.S. government. We have more stories coming up. We'll be back. Welcome back. 2 people have been injured in a fire at the world's oldest commercial rum distillery in Barbados. Fire officers tried to bring the blaze at the Mount Gay distillery under control. Workers were evacuated shortly after they heard explosions. Mount Gay has been in operation for over 300 years.
The current situation is that the roof of the tank has been ruptured, allowing the flames that is burning the alcohol to escape. And what we are currently engaged in as part of the operations is to ensure that we apply alcohol-resistant foam to the
10 students are being held by the police in Brazil after a demonstration in Sao Paulo against a rise in public transport fares. The protest was called by the Free Fares movement, which played a key role in the huge demonstrations back in 2013. The police blocked the demonstrators on the Avenida Paulista in the center of Sao Paulo. They then fired tear gas and rubber bullets to disperse the protest.
We were only making our war cry. Nobody was doing anything against the police, but they started throwing bombs at us. Without any reason, they threw tear gas. We were just sitting on the ground and chatting.
A landslide at a landfill near the Bolivian city of La Paz is threatening local residents' well-being. There are concerns that hazardous waste will enter the water supply and even spill close to homes. Community leaders have said that the black liquid emerging from the landfill is dangerous. Municipal authorities are reportedly making plans to prevent contamination.
It's a high-magnitude landslide. As you can appreciate, it's too much. Imagine, just beyond the edge where you can see with the cameras, as you can see, there are more cracks beginning to open. And beyond that, residue is leaking out. That black liquid is extremely contaminating.
Large crowds marched through Buenos Aires to demand the immediate release of indigenous activist Milagro Sala. Wednesday marked 3 years of detention for Sala, who was sentenced to 13 years in prison on Monday. The march included members of the Tupac Amaru Association, the State Workers Association, and human rights organizations.
This government of Morales and Macri came to bring hunger, came to bring unemployment, and that is why Milagro and the rest of the comrades and comrades of the Tupac are prisoners. Because they gave dignity to their people, because they built homes, because they built factories, and they built cultural centers.
Also in Argentina, following threats from pilots to go on a 48-hour strike, the government has called off a controversial hiring policy. 2 pilot unions announced they will strike against regulations favoring the hiring of foreign pilots by the National Civil Administration. The measure would have also allowed foreign pilots to replace Argentine pilots if they go on strike. A company owned by Peruvian President Martín Vizcarra has been linked to the Odebrecht case and will now be investigated. The Congress has approved an investigation on the consortium that built the South Interoceanic Highway with Odebrecht. Between 2006 and 2008, the consortium hired a company owned by Vizcarra. The president has denied the corruption allegations. Thousands of workers in Peru have taken to the streets to reject a government's reform that is hurting labor rights.
Workers do not want to be exploited anymore. Over 200 trade unions joined together to demand the government repeal a reform that has hurt labor rights. It was established as a way to supposedly promote competitiveness and productivity in the private sector.
We want to say to Mr. Vizcarra that workers and Peruvians as a whole have not given him a blank check to implement labor reforms and cut back the right of the workers. If Mr. Vizcarra does not repeal the decree, workers' unions will call for a national strike all across the country, and he will be the responsible if there is a social upheaval.
Workers will not accept attacks against their rights on labor stability, on collective negotiation, against benefits they have historically earned.
We will not allow them to take away what little we have.
He must think about the working class because we earn so little, and yet they take all the money. It shouldn't be like that.
This reform is also being questioned by several experts.
What he's doing is reducing revenues and the purchasing power of workers. Purchasing power is going to start going in the opposite direction of our economy's growth. We have to think of more competitiveness and productivity, but not at the expense of workers.
Experts assure that Peru has a 40-year history of cutting back rights. Informal work alone has grown from 25% to 75%.
If I want to end informal work, attacking something that does not generate this type of work, like the rights of the workers, will not work. It will only produce more poverty, more insecurity, but informal work will continue growing.
According to experts, one of the goals of these neoliberal policies is to destroy trade unions, which in 1990 counted for 23% of the economically active population, and today they only reach 4%.
In other news, fishermen have been repressed after clashes with the police in Chile on Wednesday. Riot police fired tear gas and water cannons at dozens of fishermen protesting. They were protesting against a law on cuttlefish capture in the southern town of Talcahuano. Demonstrators set barricades on fire and blocked access to the harbor. Industrial fishermen said the new law threatens their rights because it only allows artisan fishermen to capture the mollusks. After the Chinese probe Chang'e 4 made history by successfully landing on the far side of the moon, China announced further space exploration plans. The country will send another probe to collect lunar samples and even launch a mission to Mars in 2020.
Launched early December 2018, China's Change4 probe landed on the dark side of the moon on January 3rd. The spacecraft is composed of a lander module and a rover for exploration.
This will be the first time that we will be able to study the origin and geological formation of the far side of the moon.
Shortly after landing, the rover sent the first images of the Aitken Basin back to Earth. is an immense crater that is 2,500 kilometers in diameter from here. The international scientific community believe the probe will be able to collect data on the evolution of stars. Amongst other objectives, Change for our mission includes analyzing the terrain and detecting the mineral composition and the structure of the lunar surface. China also hopes to launch the Change 5 to bring lunar stone samples back to Earth later this year and send a Chinese astronaut to the moon by 2030. They also want to send a rover to Mars in 2020 and another one to Jupiter by 2029. And with an annual budget of about $2 billion, these plans seem plausible.
The Chinese government need to have an open mind about exploring the moon in subsequent stages. This way, we will be able to develop a set of methods to conduct more in-depth research. We welcome any international social or industrial contribution that would bring us more funds to support this mission, which is a collective mission for the whole of humanity.
Having begun in 2004, the Change program has carried out 4 missions to the moon so far and plans to send 5 more probes to further deepen the scientific knowledge of the Earth satellite. The international scientific community has acknowledged that the Chinese probe's landing on the far side of the moon was a historic achievement. China launched its first satellite into space 40 years ago. As their latest advancement in space takes a more scientific angle, the United States is making plans for a special space force, which will be the 6th branch of the armed forces. President Trump has said the U.S. presence in space is not enough. But as for China, their mission remains scientific for now.
We're taking one last break, but stay with us. Welcome back. The son of Press TV anchor Marcia Hashemi said that he and his siblings have received subpoenas to appear before a grand jury in Washington, D.C. Hashemi, a U.S. citizen working for the Iranian news agency, is currently being detained in Washington. Her eldest son is asking for answers as to why his mother was arrested and said that it is important to look at her line of work. Hashemi made documentaries on Black Lives Matter and is critical of many of the domestic and foreign policies of the U.S. government. Iran's foreign minister has said that the U.S. should immediately release the TV anchor without further delay.
First of all, Mrs. Hashemi is also an Iranian citizen because of the nationality of her husband, her late husband, and that is why we have a right to continue to look after her interests as an Iranian citizen who has been wrongfully imprisoned in the United States. She is a famous journalist. She's done nothing but journalism, and the arrest of Mrs. Hashemi is a very clear affront to freedom of expression, a political abuse of an innocent individual, and I believe the United States should release her immediately without further delay.
The United Nations has said almost 900 people are believed to have died in ethnic violence in the Democratic Republic of Congo in the lead up to last month's election. The UN said most of the violence occurred in the country's northwest between 2 ethnic groups. And while the bloodshed was not directly related to the election, reports indicate that tensions increased after the groups backed different candidates. The death toll from Thursday's terrorist attack at a hotel in Kenya has risen to 21. Authorities had earlier reported that 15 people were killed. Somalia-based militant group Al-Shabaab claimed responsibility for the attack. A statement released by this group said their main motivation was the decision of the U.S. President Donald Trump to recognize Jerusalem as the capital of Israel.
The nationalities of the persons who very sadly lost their lives: 16 Kenyans, 1 Briton, 1 American, and 3 persons of African descent whom we are yet to identify.
The Ivory Coast government has responded to the decision of the International Criminal Court to acquit former President Laurent Gbagbo, who has been charged with crimes against humanity.
The government takes note of the decision of the International Criminal Court. The government also notes the ICC prosecutor's decision to appeal this decision. In these circumstances, the head of state and the government have a thought for the victims and assure them of their support.
In Greece, Prime Minister Alexis Tsipras managed to defend his agreement to normalize relations with Macedonia. With 151 votes in favor from a total of 299, Tsipras overcame a motion of no confidence and avoided the need to move the planned general election to an earlier date. The Prime Minister will submit the agreement reached with Macedonian Prime Minister Zoran Zaev to Parliament. Both leaders hope to definitely bury the historic dispute over the legitimacy of Macedonia's name. According to a Red Cross report on poverty, around 1 million citizens in Spain have to choose between a proper diet or paying the bills for basic services such as electricity, heating, and water.
In an investigation conducted with almost 2 million people, 56% of respondents said they have struggles related to housing and energy poverty. These issues have consequences for their health, provoking respiratory diseases, rheumatism, or arthritis. According to the Red Cross, what these people want are jobs rather than social assistance.
It's very interesting and lovely to say that people should be taught how to fish, but while they learn, they need to eat and they need to have the heating on. So we have to combine two kinds of aid because the usual request is support in finding a job.
62% of those in the study have an average or high level of education. We are talking about new poor people. On top of that, the unemployment rate among them is as high as 58%, 17 points fewer than in 2008. On the other hand, 89% of the ones who have a job live under the poverty threshold.
There has been an improvement in the employment rate, but also an increase in job insecurity and poor conditions. So even when people have a job, they can't make it to the end of the month, and the black economy is growing.
Just 19% of the population benefits from the so-called social bonus, provided by the state to help pay the bills. Ignorance of, and the difficulty of fulfilling all requirements, explain why this figure is so low.
The social bonus should benefit all and cover more people that need it. On the other hand, policies for more energy-efficient housing should be promoted.
Policies should transform into benefits to improve housing insulation and the use of renewable energies, so that no one has to choose between eating properly or living in a warm home.
British Prime Minister Theresa May won the no-confidence motion by a short margin on Wednesday. With 325 votes in favor and 306 against, May will remain as Prime Minister. The no-confidence motion was presented on Tuesday by Labour leader Jeremy Corbyn, after a majority of lawmakers rejected May's Brexit deal. This has been called the biggest political defeat of any government since the 1920s.
I'm pleased that this House has expressed its confidence in the government tonight. I do not take this responsibility lightly, and my government will continue its work to increase our prosperity, guarantee our security, and to strengthen our union. And yes, we will also continue to work to deliver on the solemn promise we made to the people of this country to deliver on the result of the referendum and leave the European Union.
And before we end, we have a sports story for football fans. Marcelo Bielsa, current head coach of English football club Leeds United, has held a press conference in which he explained his reasons for sending a spy to our rivals' training session. So-called Spygate has caused a minor furor in English football. Going into great detail, the Argentine coach claimed that doing so was not illegal. Bielsa added that even though he can't speak English, he can speak about the 24 football teams in the English second division. And with that, we end our news brief, but you can find these and many other stories from our website at telesturenglish.net. And we're also on social media, so go ahead and follow us. For Telesur English, I'm Carla Gonzalez. Thank you for watching.